Welcome to Rockstar Doctor Life. I'm Melissa Longo. As a chiropractor, I believe we have the profound ability to impact our communities and people's health on a global level, while also enjoying rich and rewarding personal lives and giving attention to the things that matter to us. Each week, you'll hear an inspiring conversation to give you ideas and insights to rock your practice, pursue your passions, find more connection and meaning in your life, and create a life and business that works for you. Okay, Rockstar listeners, I am really grateful that Dr. David Fletcher is here with me today. We've had an awesome pre-chat. We've dealt with some technical difficulties, and I know that you are going to listen to this conversation feeling completely inspired and with some great takeaway points to improve your life as a doctor. So thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Fletcher.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And, you know, I always laugh because running a tech firm, I'm always amazed at how wrapped up we are in tech, and then when little things go wrong, it's pretty amazing they get fixed. So well done.
Now, many people listening today have heard you speak. They know who you are, but take us through a little bit of a snapshot of where you're at these days with, you know, career life, with your family life. What's Dr. Fletcher doing these days?
Well, I'm blessed to have an amazing family. I think that many people know Nancy, my wife. As well, we have 3 kids. They're sort of at that interesting phase of where you think they've left, but they keep migrating back into our house, at least for dinners, anyways. Mm-hmm. So at the high end of their 20s, and you know, that allows myself to really take a look at career paths. So I was actually over the tables for about 36 years, and it's only in the past 2 years that I have been sort of divesting my time as a chiropractor away from the actual day-to-day practice. And that was a pretty interesting transition. But that transition took me to own and run the day-to-day operations with CLA. And I think many of the listeners will know that CLA is probably the largest, or at least best known, technology instrumentation company in the profession. And it was started many years ago by Jen Temple and Kent. But I had a long affiliation with CLA before I took it over, as being the clinical advisor for them over the years, and speaker, obviously. So I probably have met many of your listeners either through speaking or attending different programs with them, or perhaps they're clients of ours. Mm-hmm.
And talk about that transition from you being in, you know, day-to-day practice for 36 years to now not practicing. I mean, what's that like for you? Do you miss it?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that I was born to be anything other than a chiropractor. And so I was in my passion place when I was putting my hands on patients and adjusting. And you know, I think that in that crucible of adjusting and meeting the people and caring for the people and learning who I was as a person and as a chiropractor, there's sort of that next step that you see. And so I made a decision, and it was a quantum shift, because, you know, I was more than thrilled to remain a chiropractor in practice, to really take the helm of this. And boy, what a learning curve it is to run a business, you know, hands-on and working with it, not just owning it. And it's given me an opportunity to meet some amazing chiropractors. And my goal has been to, you know, inspire chiropractors at this level so that I can have more of a, you know, exponential reach out into the families that I care most about, which is if I can inspire the doctors, hopefully they can take that one level further. So that's the goal. Mm-hmm.
And something that I'm sure your years in clinical practice has given you a unique perspective in your role as well.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting, because I think in that intersection point between meeting the patient and you know, giving the adjustments, running the practice, and everything else, you know, we're constantly, you know, in that interplay between you know, feeling and function, which is sort of one of the essences of why I'm in the CLA side, is that, you know, we have to really address and meet the people with where they're at, whether it's emotionally or communication wise or otherwise. You know, they know their bodies best, at least how they feel in their bodies. But at some point we have to be able to you know, be the doctor, as Fred Bard used to say, and listen to them, but then be their guide and their trusted advisor. And so I think that those years and years and years of listening and adjusting and taking a hard stance with patients, meaning, you know, making sure that they knew where their path best lay, really trained me to be very capable in working on the business side as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at, I love what you said there too about recognizing that your children are, adults now. And so that's freeing up time for you to pursue different interests for you career-wise, to create a different impact in chiropractic. It's not something that you could have likely done when they were in school, right? Or when they were younger, when they were babies. So, talk about, and the reason I bring that up is because a lot of docs want to get involved in doing different things, but, they're at a stage of their life with their family where they can't necessarily take the time away, or they don't want to take the time away. And so trying to help them remember, like, your life is long and your role as a parent is different now, as you alluded to, but what you're doing now is different. So how has your time in practice earlier on when your children were little, I mean, that's where you needed to be at that time of your life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Melissa, it's interesting because, and you and I in our pre-roll really uncovered some really cool things about, utilizing those around you to support your vision and dream. And, the one thing that I know I learned in my early practice and has helped me even when the kids are at their ages now is that you can only grow as far as you can delegate. And to delegate, you have to have that trust in the person you're going to be with. So, in the situation I'm at right now, where I like to say that they're gone, but I think I'm more involved than anything. Where and just a word from the perhaps the one little further down the path here. If you think there's a time in which they actually free you up, it's a misnomer. There's
it just changes.
There's none of that going on, but that's part of the joy of being a parent. So in the early days when I was practicing, and my wife has a full-time career as well, and she was always involved in the development of my career. It was a very busy life, especially with three younger ones. And so, we were talking earlier, Melissa, but this is where I really found the passion of hiring. In that case, it was a nanny to work on the front side. But I think that if we're talking, especially to the women in here who have those family pulls and they feel like they're trapped in the practice, I think one of the things that I learned very early on was the most important asset that I could have was somebody who I could rely upon as my trusted advisor in working with me. And that doesn't mean an associate. And many times those were more of a burden than they were the gift that you thought they were. It was my CHA, or my nanny in the house. Just freeing up my mindset, knowing that my kids or my patients were in these trusted places. It allowed me to have that freedom to start to be creative and grow.
Yeah, and you talked about it being an insurance policy.
Yeah, that's funny because when Nancy and I were sort of, writing the checks out, there's a tendency to sort of say, oh, I dread paying for this. It's not an expense, I promise you. It was like paying for an insurance policy, a relationship insurance policy more than anything. To have a really trusted person support you, it means that you can go out and do what you're best at. Mm-hmm. And although I'm a hell of a good parent, there were, at 2 p.m. when I should be adjusting patients, there's a really great caregiver looking after my kids.
Mm-hmm. I know. I love that you talked about delegating because it's something that I think that not only should we be delegating in our business lives, but there's so many ways that we can delegate and outsource our personal lives as well, whether having someone prepare meals for you or clean your house or look after your children. It's hiring people to support your vision and to make your life run smoother so that you can be fully present and engaged with your skill sets.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you take a look at, and again, now I'm moving into more of the, CEOs and presidents affiliation, not just chiropractors, and you start to realize that the common theme amongst those who are in that ascendant process is that they're not so much, driven by the type A behaviors, is that they've figured out how to condense their lives into those really productive pockets. And they don't diminish their skill sets in the business world, and they certainly don't take away from their life experiences because they've learned to delegate out and work with those who work with them. Mm-hmm. I have to share with you, I'm blessed. I know a number of billionaires, and as a result of that, I get to kind of hang out with them. They're very close friends of mine, and we go skiing together. And so I was skiing this past week, and I know this will probably air in more of a temperate climb time. But, one of the things that we were sort of looking at was that these guys who were very capable in business, obviously, had the richest lives that you can imagine, not just because they travel a lot and otherwise, but they are at ease in their families and otherwise. It's really great to see. You can have it all.
You can have it all. And I think it's important to really get clear, male or female, like what your all is, and particularly at any given point in your life, right? When you have small children, you might want to be present to coach their hockey teams or go to their soccer games or just be home to do homework. And as they grow older, you know, what your all is going to look like. You have more free time. As you said earlier, you know, your children need you in different ways as they go through young adulthood. But you have more time because, you know, you're not running them around to all their activities and whatnot. So it's evolving and continuing to figure out what your all is. You sound, and I'm guessing that it's been a process for you over all of your years as an adult, but how have you developed defining success for yourself? Because you're really clear on, you know, what you wanted for your family and what you wanted for your business and even continuing moving forward. And I think that's not something that everyone always takes time to reflect on.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey. I guess that would be the most interesting thing. Success is obviously a very personal experience, but the one thing that is universal in terms of success is abundance. Abundance is a very interesting rating system, if you would. I think that most of us who are listening on this, you know, have abundant knowledge, you know, in other words, that they've ascended to a point where they're in that sort of top, you know, 1/10 of 1% of the educated in this world. Yet we strive to learn more. So you sort of ask yourself, well, you know, is that the same as it is in financial? You know, is enough enough? And you have to ask yourself, is enough learning enough? Is enough financial security enough? And the truth of it is that that's your choice. I know I chose, for instance, to be a lifelong learner. And so in that same sort of vein of being a lifelong learner, I chose to be a lifelong earner. And, you know, whether I'm going to put my hands on somebody or manage my finances or otherwise, I really seek abundance for a very simple reason, is that it affords me more experience. I have different experiences. I have more experiences when I'm more engaged in the life I have. So an abundant family for me means that it's critical at this stage of life, as my kids are in that transition from, you know, in their adulthood, and they're going into their next phase of where they're developing their lifelong relationships. I'm sort of in that lovely quiescent time of where I can sort of say, well, you know, before grandkids come or otherwise, you know, what do I want to do with my kids? And the abundance that I have allows me to meet their time schedules. They're busy in their work environment, so I get a chance to take them on vacations, or I get a chance to buy a home. For instance, I'm traveling with my daughter to Japan in a couple of weeks because I can. And those are the experiences that I just adore having because I made the decision that my path would follow abundance. So I don't know if that fits into that success story, but that's sort of the model I like.
Well, you're looking at defining your success as a human being based on your financial abundance, your family abundance, your career, your contribution abundance, right? You're looking at the different pieces rather than just measuring your success in one metric only.
Look, I can make a lot of money in any way I wanted to. If I wanted to sell real estate, I could make a ton of money. So I learned a long time ago that it wasn't about the money by defining my success. I've never not had a successful bank account, we'll say. Even when I was a kid, I was delivering papers and I had more money than the rest of the kids. You know, the realities is that abundance is not simply, you know, an account that works. Abundance is figuring out how to be happy. At least that's what I found, is not only happy, but be joyful. And a source of joy for me are my friends. And, you know, I think that our friends, and I think we've all noticed this, our friends, you know, although we may have many acquaintances, our friends tend to follow a very narrow path. You know, the people you trust and love the most and want to share the most with. And because I'm on the road a lot, you know, it's difficult to maintain sort of my local friendships. So I have friends literally that are around the world. And I think that's one of the driving forces for me to be on the road so much, is that it gives me a chance to meet up with these people and have an entirely interesting and wonderful relationship with them. And I think that, Melissa, what I'm trying to get at is I don't think that I designed my travel life around meeting the friends. I think that I somehow have these friends in distant places. So it demanded that I had figured out a job that had travel. That sort of is the interesting dichotomy.
Well, like you said, you had how to be happy and how to be joyful no matter what you're doing is a great litmus test, right? And you talked about earlier in our pre-chat about there being some limitations and you coached, I know, for a number of years as well, in limitations in people not getting to know what matters to them and following other people's models of success or defining their own life or comparing themselves to other people. So let's talk a little bit about your experience in observing that and what advice you would have for people listening and to find that inner confidence, that inner path where they need to be going with their own practice in life.
Boy, that brings up a couple of points that I love to think about. I think that in my day-to-day practice, or at least during the practice, I started to realize that my role as a doctor, and literally as a titled doctor, sometimes needed to evolve. I think it's very important to show the certainty of the clinical aspects that a doctor is. But as we go down a path after the people have become part of our practice life, and you really work in that sort of salutogenic model where you're really diving into the living experience with patients, not just their physical experience. I really like to shift my titling to be more of their trusted advisor than their doctor. I just found that kind of removed a barrier from that. And there was sort of that same principle, in so many ways we're coaches to our patients. And in so many ways, I found that when I was an active coach, there was a real challenge. I found that many people wanted to live my life, and I didn't want that to be what I determined my coaching model to be. I wanted them to be empowered to find their authentic self and to roll through it. And so I found that, when I started being coached, if you would, it wasn't even coaching, it was practice consultancy. And there was a little bit of a good thing about that because you didn't really buy you didn't drink the Jim Jones Kool-Aid of the guy who was in front of you. You learned their procedures and you found out what was going to work, and then you applied them in yourself. I find that in so many ways today, the coaching systems that exist, and I'm very familiar with most of them, really are there to build these communities. But in so many ways, I find that the upper echelons are people that are striving to be emulating what the leader does and is. And I think that's very disempowering. I think you have to find your own path. I think you have to jump the nest, as we were talking about. Mm-hmm. At some point, I think it's very healthy to get the hell out of a very controlled environment and find your next one to grow into.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the quickest way to find a lack of joy is to be pursuing what someone else is telling you to do and not really having it connect with who you are.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so critical to be critical, and I don't mean critical in an angry way. To understand, like the word argument isn't supposed to be a negative experience. Arguing is to show your confidence in a point and enroll people into your perspective. And so I find that being critical is that you need to have such certainty. You have to watch the value you're putting out. I mean, these are hard-earned dollars that you're paying for a very many times expensive coaching program. Mm-hmm. So you have to find that balance between where you want to go and how you need to move forward. And I think it's just a really critical window of time. This is the part that always gets me, Melissa, and I sort of lean forward as I say it. Chiropractors are by nature risk takers. They risk, probably the 4 or 5 most important years of their lives, or at least my thought is as I watch my kids, when they're in that sort of 20 to 25 zone and they're risking everything to become a chiropractor. And for whatever reason, whether it's the, ineffective school inspiration and otherwise, they walk out and all of that bravado, which got them into the school, sort of seems to evaporate as they get into the practice world. And I just want to stand back and tell them, whether they're men or women or otherwise, it's fun and it's safe to be in practice. It's an incredible experience. And if you're not having that, and the reason I'm sort of saying that is we're both Canadians here, mm-hmm. and many I'm a CMCC grad, and yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. I am.
Yeah. And I really loved my alma mater. I really felt that I got a tremendous amount out of it. And there's a but coming in here, but it has changed from when I started. that many years ago. And I do find that many of the challenges that we see are that there's this sort of misunderstanding of what the power of a chiropractor is in the community and in practice, from whether it's CMCC or other of the schools. It doesn't really matter. But I find that instead of feeling empowered, many times they have to search out more than a mentor. They're really looking for something that they can define themselves through, and that's very dangerous. You have to at least at some point develop your own level of certainty.
Part of me, though, wonders, and I had this conversation with a few other docs here on the show, is it something that comes to us with age? I mean, I'm in my 40s. Yeah. I've talked to a lot of docs who are at a variety of ages and stages of life, and I'm curious as to part of our understanding of who we are as humans and getting to know ourselves and that inner confidence, is that just something that comes with our age and wisdom? Or can you cultivate that in your 20s when you're fresh out of school?
Oh, I'm pretty sure you could. I think, there's the bit old fake it till you make it principle. I think that there's always those who are more well prepared to be, in a public environment than others. But I do think that the majority of people, the 80-20 split, are that, experience is the teacher. And I do think that you have to experience meeting a number of patients, like thousands of patients over time, to gain that confidence, to know that that when you place your hands on something, on a patient, that something miraculous has the potential to happen. I think you can learn that, but you have to go from educated knowledge to experiential knowledge to really fulfill that great step. And the third level of knowingness is where you reach, and I think you're at it now yourself, is where you develop that level of mastery. You become unconsciously competent in that ability to know exactly. You don't have to think out the subluxation. You don't have to think out the clinical profile. You don't have to think out the care plan. You don't have to think out the relationship. It just is. And that's sort of the essence of how I practice for the last 25 years of my practice. And it was joyful. It was really a great way to live a life.
There's no better way to grow a practice, I don't think, any of the fancy things you can be doing these days, than with your inner certainty, right? Your confidence in what you're doing when you adjust people, and how to communicate with confidence that you know what you're doing and that you're positive that the chiropractic adjustment is going to make an impact, or however you practice. Where do you think docs, and I know this is probably a great tie-in question to what you guys are doing at CLA, let's talk about how do docs find more certainty in practice, and certainly the technology that you guys have is one of the tools.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's what drew me to it. I have a very, if I was going to say the greatest thing that you can do, if you want to just open the best practice in the world, which is what we should all do, it sort of goes on the conversation we had right now, is that you have to have that inner confidence. So at least fake it till you make it. Walk into the community with that. But in terms of practical sense, I think you need a really strong advocate at your front desk. I think you need a couple of really good tables, not one, but a couple of really good tables. And I think you need objective measurement devices. And, because the Insight, which is the piece of technology that CLA developed, is designed to look deeper, beyond the spine only, and look into the firing and functioning nervous system. And it was designed through the subluxation modeling, which was to look at the ranges under which somebody is well adjusted and somebody is subluxated. It gives them the confidence, that inner confidence, that self-confidence, to know that they're moving their patient in the direction that they intended to. And it also is an honest assessment, because life is messy. Just because it's not all unicorns and roses when you take a patient on. They don't just automatically, get to where they think they should be, or where you think they should be. It's a journey. And as a result of that, you have this honest reflection as to how healthy the functioning nervous system is, so you can have honest conversations. I had more conversations when we were looking at the scans, that even when the patient was feeling better and their function wasn't there, I had the confidence to say, I'm surprised. I thought we'd be further ahead on your path. Let's change a little bit of where we're going, so that the next examination defines where we take it from there. That's how I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, and I think it's also a powerful teaching moment in our practices when we can help people connect their emotional stress to their subluxation patterns, their chemical stress. You know,
Yeah.
it's an amazing, oh, I feel really great, doc. Okay, but your scan looks like this. Or, hey, you know what? I'm noticing a whole different pattern in what's going on in the tension in your spine today. What else is going on here? And it can open the window for them to then be able to consider what else are they doing when they're not in our practices that can support their health and healing, whether it's changing how they're moving, it's changing how they're sleeping, it's what they're eating, it's, you know, so many other things that go in. And I think, as you said earlier, you know, we can become their trusted advisors and leaders in our community about health and wellness, not just on the adjustment.
Absolutely. And you know, I think that, you know, chiropractors have wisely used a number of different strategies to be, you know, to use education tools. And for goodness sakes, please don't misunderstand when I say this to all our listeners. Using an X-ray is not, you know, as an educational tool. It's a very, you know, thoughtful decision to irradiate somebody. So please, you know that I'm not suggesting that it's there. But once you get an X-ray, it became for the chiropractors, especially in the evolution of chiropractic, that sort of relevant third-party confirmation that they needed the care or that they were moving through care. But it's toxic and it's difficult and you know it's not to be used in this sort of active progressive pre and post check and things of that nature. Certainly not over a long term. And this is one of the reasons I was drawn especially to scanning in my early days, long before I worked for CLA or owned the company or otherwise. I wanted an objective measure that was looking deeper and looking, you know, reliably and with validity into the functioning nervous system. And with the evolution lately of the heart rate variability, you know, we have this amazing new tool. It's not new. It's been around in the culture for probably 20 years. But in chiropractic, you know, Dr. Kent, myself, really pioneered how chiropractic and HRV really moved forward into a popular way. And just so people know, we have thousands of doctors using our HRV systems now. And the value of it is that it's so chiropractic at so many levels because it looks at the capacity of the autonomic system to you know, I was going to say be less vulnerable, but to take it to a positive, to be totally capable to have a reserve to take on as much of life as you can. And if it isn't that way, we can see whether they're locked into a fight-flight storm or whether they're over-exhausted and have adrenal insufficiencies. And at the same time as we're doing that, we remember that the HRV is really a measure of the vagal tone that's associated with the processing, you know, nervous system. So what better way than a chiropractic adjustment to re-engage what really matters in life? So HRV has become one of the great standards in our system. And following up with that, you use your EMG and your thermals to look at those spinal connectivities. You really have this incredibly succinct and very narrow grouping of chiropractic-centric technologies. And the whole thing takes about 8 minutes to test somebody. So you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't you be part of that? Mm-hmm. It's pretty exciting, actually, to the evolution of the technologies. And, you know, everything from the wireless to cloud-based to, you know, to big data scrapes and everything else. It's the most fun I've had in a long, long time.
So I mean, this might be an obvious question, but what keeps you inspired?
Oh, you know what? I'm a chiropractor through and through, and so I think that I know that sounds crazy, but you know, when I read a book, I read chiropractic into every sentence. I think that what I've seen in practice and what I know in working with chiropractors is this whole principle, and I know it's a bromide, but it really is there, of understanding human potential, of really just seeing it. So what keeps me engaged is this idea that if we keep getting better and better as chiropractors, and we keep getting better and better at our craft, at our communication, at our ability to, you know, I was going to say convince, but really just communicate the power of what started 100 years ago, which was this idea of what innate consciousness and innate capacities were. I really feel that if we keep getting better and better, the world's going to be a better place. And I know that's a big message, but I've seen it in every community. When I adjust a parent, and we started this, Melissa, in our practice a number of years ago, is that when I would start up my day, we would have our huddle. And when we started our day, we created what we would refer to as the 4G family dynamic. And the 4G Verizon stole it from me, by the way. The four, I'm joking, but the 4G stood for 4 generations. And we would, in our office, recognize that we were trained, capable, and inviting to 4 generations of anybody that walked through that door. That means that if a mother came in, go backwards, to her child, to her parents, to her grandparents, we would have all the skills that were necessary, all the examination tools that were necessary to engage that person and get them to a higher state. And when we made that commitment, that we were a 4G family practice and we were relevant to everybody, obviously our practice exploded. But we were completely congruent with our actions. And so it was just this finely tuned experience and machine where we were never off point. It was gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. And now you're traveling so much and you're observing, I'm sure, lots of docs and their, behaviors and their, programs that they're involved in. And what are you observing within chiropractic these days as far as, internationally? I mean, you're traveling all over the place. And I think you have a unique vantage point of which you're observing so many different patterns, ideologies. Like, what are you observing these days in chiropractic from where you saw it, let's say, 20 years ago?
Well, I think 20 years is an interesting window of time. I think that, the Mercedes 80s was all insurance driven and that kind of came and went. And then 20 years ago, I think that what we started to see was this great void of certainty within chiropractic. And I'm happy to report that there's more of a resurgence towards the definition as to what we are. And we're not defining ourselves necessarily as other healthcare providers. We're not, being Canadian, you and I, many times when we were growing up, we sort of had this love affair and wish that we were more American than not. And I think that in chiropractic, we've kind of broken away from that love affair of being, doctors that were recognized by medical doctors and others. So I see that on my travels, there's sort of a very, maybe I'm endlessly hopeful, but I do see that there is this sort of sense that chiropractic is defining itself through the youthful chiropractors and saying, we're really satisfied of being who we are. So I'm hopeful for that. I think that I really see, and you and I were talking a bit earlier, I think that if you take a look at the statistics of those graduating, there's a slight overweight now of women graduating more than men in chiropractic schools. And I'm very hopeful for that as well. So I think that you start to see internationally pockets of very interesting growth and development. There's sort of a backslide in some communities. For instance, Australia, was flourishing. And there was one media attack that was on pediatrics, and it sent the entire profession into a tailspin. And it will come back out of that, but it shows us how fragile the psyche is of the collective chiropractors in certain regions. We were around, you were around, and I was around when there was the stroke issue in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, we all got hammered with that in our practice and otherwise, but we rebounded. Mm-hmm. And I think that you start to see that there you're going to find a lot of other people that are, finding their way through these adversities. So I'm endlessly hopeful. I think that we see an emergence in Latin America of chiropractic coming up. I think you see European chiropractors really, really becoming capable. I think you start to see that there is a listing of really interesting chiropractors showing up at these different conferences that I speak at. I think it's really great, mm-hmm. That you get a chance to see them. And I think there's a ton of mentorship that the older, and I don't mean the word older, mature would be the word to say. I mean, take a look at older, and I'm joking with this. You've interviewed Ryan French. Mm-hmm. He's not old at all, but he's wise.
I would have to agree with that. Yeah, I think he's only a couple years older than I am, but I feel like he's got years more of experience.
A lot of wisdom that goes along with it. And he's chosen a path, and Ryan is a local to our Southern Ontario doctor here. He's a doctor who has taken it upon himself to develop mentorship and otherwise. And I think that that's a role that we have to see, that middle ground, Melissa, like your age chiropractors, certainly my generation of chiropractors, is needing to pass it on. I was just on the phone with Sheila Marsh, and the two of us are, of the same, we graduated 1 year apart, and we really recognize that part of our role, and you see, and it's so interesting, you see this in business too, is that when you're starting to look at CEOs and otherwise, they really see their role not as a gift back to the profession, but an absolute necessity, that their role is to encourage youth to be successful. And I really find that part of my role is to get in front of people and not only discuss the certainty that grew my life, but to tell them that they are absolutely capable to exceed anything that I've achieved, to go far beyond anything that I started. And that's the Galilean principle of standing on the greatness of the shoulders of others. So I think it's so exciting when I travel around to see a willingness. There's a lot of hurdles in this profession. There's a lot of backwash, and there's really crappy legislation that comes and derails things at times. England, the UK has, and we fought very hard, amongst ourselves here, and we supported it and grouped together for that to fight the GCC for when it was draconianly put together. And, out of that grew the UCC, which is United Chiropractic Counselor Group. And they're larger now than the British Chiropractic Association, and the UCC are subluxation-centered chiropractors who believe in it. I was speaking at a group there, and there were like 650 people in the room, and the BCA doesn't even have that many members. So, there's hope when I look internationally that when we do that Margaret Mead thing, which is sort of to say, you never know how far, what you say and what you do is going to inspire a group to come together or something like that. I do think that more than anything, if we put our collective minds together, we can push this thing called chiropractic to heights we've never seen before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gosh, there's so much that's happening. And I think it's an exciting time. I think it's always how you look at things, right? You can focus on the negativity or you can focus on the potential and the positivity. And most docs that I talk to, the more years are in practice, they get excited. I'm more excited now to be a chiropractor because of the things that I'm seeing, as you talked about earlier. My experiences of adjusting people, the healing that you see happen is far different than what the textbooks are going to tell you, or what the colleges are going to tell you. When you actually start having those real-time interactions with people, it's a really powerful thing that keeps me fired up for sure.
I had and I absolutely concur with what you're saying there. It was very interesting. Probably about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, we were introduced to a Harvard professor who was pretty much the guy who wrote the book on ADD and ADHD. And I'm not sure that it was a great book because it really was one of those early ones that was more medical than it should have been. But Ned Hallowell was a really interesting guy to work with, and he loved the idea of working together with chiropractors, and that didn't happen 25 years ago. There wasn't the guy standing up and saying, you know what, this stuff works. And I think that one of the things that we see is that more and more people want to be affiliated, with chiropractic. I get calls all the time. They're not business calls; they're interesting calls. I was giving a lecture in Brussels, and it was at a chiropractic conference, and one of the co-presenters there was Yuri Gidron, who is a researcher from the French area, and I believe Belgium itself. And he is one of the world's foremost HRV researchers, and he published a paper indicating that HRV was a far greater indicator of the progression of cancer than, for instance, tumor size. And when we sat down and had a conversation about adaptability and the possibilities in chiropractic, it was, how can I get more involved? You guys are on the right path. You at least have what it takes to make a difference instead of just writing a paper. You can adjust somebody. And if people only knew that in our profession and didn't fight this whole idea, of having to have a double-blinded study, if you just started to recognize evidence-informed basics of making sure that you were watching through clinical studies, case studies, best practices, that people under our care exceed the expectations clinically of just about any other parameter. It's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if there was, I would love to keep chatting with you, and I've had the pleasure of being on the phone here with you for over an hour, even though our chat on the podcast is shorter. What would be one thing you'd want all chiropractors to know?
Well, I certainly don't want to sound self-serving here, but the one thing I would like them to know is that they are all powerful when they understand the devastating effects of a subluxation and their ability to identify and track their care with the patient. That is so powerful for a chiropractor. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about the antiquity of the concept of chiropractic and, of the subluxation. I think people have to realize that it's as relevant today as it has always been. If you want to change the lexicon, go ahead. It's not going to be under my watch, but what we're really talking about is an identifiable entity that is related to neuroplasticity. Call it Fred if you want to call it. But a subluxation has a devastating effect when it is progressively, engaged in interrupting the neurofunctionality of that person, and their ideation changes and their ability to be human changes. And here's the best part, is that chiropractic, by luck or by design, has figured out that when you give an adjustment to a subluxation, it unleashes the greatest power that humans have ever even had a chance to experience. And that's, the innate intelligence and the collective consciousness associated with that. And it just erupts. And so if they could understand the power that they had, and that they could track that and engage the patient. And, obviously I stand with a company that believes in that and recognizes the value of technology in showing the patient that. So I would suggest that they keep their ears and eyes open, and that they engage with people that have a bigger vision than them, and stay connected. Yeah. Yeah,
and build your tribe and surround yourself with people who will lift you up, and listen to podcasts, do the Facebook Lives. Like, you guys are doing some really great things online these days to help docs just stay engaged. So listeners, be sure to click on the show notes and connect with Dr. David Fletcher and CLA, and get on their Facebook Lives and look at their systems, and how they can improve your practice. Thank you so much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, not only as a fellow Canadian, but just because of who you are. I'm sitting here feeling quite humbled today, because as I was mentioning earlier, I have 3 interviews that I'm doing today with 3 amazing people, and people that I've often watched by being in an audience, and to have this chance to have a conversation with you and learn from you more, and all these listeners too. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And if I could just say at the very end, I absolutely applaud and acknowledge the effort that it takes to put together this ongoing, I think it's a year-long podcast series that you have. And I just want to reach back and put the mirror on you and say, congratulations. It's work like this that re-engages certainly women and families in practice, but especially people that are searching for that we'll call it, next level experience within chiropractic. So thank you so much for including me.
Thanks for being here today. If you like this show, please share it with another chiropractor and connect them with this message. We are always better off together than we are alone. If you haven't yet subscribed, head on over to Apple Podcasts or iTunes, and don't forget to rate and review the show while you're there. Be sure to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook, and find out more about today's guests and all things Rockstar Doctor Life by clicking in those show notes. See you next time.